Make it plain.
Make it plain.
M.I.P.
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're happy to have with us here on the podcast someone who actually, in his own way, promotes the podcast because he has me on his show frequently, and he always talks about the Make It Plain podcast, and we are definitely appreciative of that. And it's good to turn the tables, too, because we rarely get to hear him unfiltered, because when you're a host and moderator, you kind of have to let other people talk. He is none other than the host of The Beat with Ari Melber. Ari Melber is here with us on Make It Plain. Hey, man, how are you?
Great to be on Make It Plain. And, yes, we shout it out because we love having you on The Beat on MSNBC. So happy to flip it around.
Yeah, and it is a pleasure to have you. So let's start this way. With everything that's going on, from impeachment to some of these sentencing decisions that are taking place, Ari, what are your thoughts about the state? Trump gives a State of the Union. I'm going to ask you to give the state of the legal community, the state of legality constitutionally in our country right now.
The State of the Union is messed up, but not shredded. Mm-hmm. Although the pages of the State of the Union were shredded by Speaker Pelosi, and people are understandably concerned. I'm concerned, and we try to bring that with evidence in the reporting we do. The attacks on the Justice Department, the president's retaliation against people who cooperated with subpoenas and a co-equal branch of government in the impeachment trial, the retribution, what I'm seeing as kind of the revenge tour, all of that is a challenge to our rule of law. Mm-hmm. That does not mean that he has defeated all rule of law. For example, while there is evidence that he is instructing his Justice Department to intervene on behalf of his friends, which is wrong, the decision still will be made by an independent judge who, by the way, has life tenure. So while he goes and tries to fire other people, and that still has to be addressed and litigated potentially, boy, isn't it good we have a system where the president literally cannot fire the judges. Yeah. So the founders who got some things very wrong also got some things very right. They perceived that this risk existed before they'd ever met Donald Trump or any other person who comes along. So I do think both things can be true. We cannot normalize or minimize the kinds of attacks and challenges to literally our democracy when you look at what was exposed in the Ukraine plot, what the president continues to do in broad daylight. But that does not mean that people say, oh, well, I guess nothing works and he won, because that's what he wants you to think. And it's not the case when so much of the government still functions under the actual constitutional dimension, which is supposed to be stronger than any politician.
So speaking of the founders and what they got right and what they got wrong, the relationship between the Attorney General and the White House and there being, some level of autonomy in terms of the Department of Justice and Attorney General, that's more understood than written out, isn't it?
Yeah, that's much more custom, and it's something that was strengthened after Watergate and has clearly been weakened under Trump.
Yeah. So there's that. I asked Maya Wiley a question about the impeachment process. Did they get that wrong by demanding or asserting it has to be 2/3 of the Senate? I mean, there seems to be, we saw it with Clinton, and some would say, objectively, that was the result of that was partisan. Others would say, well, that wasn't an impeachable offense. This kind of went down in a very similar way, except for Romney. Is there a way to really carry out an impeachment of a president in a partisan environment?
I think history suggests that while impeachments sometimes begin on the facts, the process, when it has ever ended, ends in a partisan way. So much of the conversation now is about how things are worse under Trump. Interestingly, it took things to get as bad as Trump made them to actually have the first ever senator vote against the president of his own party. Mm-hmm. Just one, Mitt Romney. But before that, it had literally never happened. Yeah. So that's an area where you can document what Trump is doing, but you can also see that the Senate has always done that in a party way, which raises the question of whether giving it to a political body is the right call.
Yeah. as you just in New Hampshire, you're out here looking at the campaigns as well. As you interact with people off the air, what are you hearing? Are you hearing that people are like literally concerned about what is happening to our democracy?
Well, it's always interesting getting out there. I mean, I talk to experts, legal veterans, people who serve in the Justice Department, and you hear these concerns, and we do that kind of reporting. We talk to the campaigns. Coming right back out from New Hampshire, and we interviewed voters on air, on live TV. We also went out to events and talked to them without the cameras on, so you get the benefit of both. You know, if I go out in a hat, a warm hat, and a parka, and I'm in the line of New Hampshire, most people I talk to seem to have no idea who I am, and so it's a really good. It's really good if I'm in the suit and I'm with the TV camera, whether they know or not. It obviously alters it.
Right.
So I love doing both. What I'm hearing from at least Democratic primary voters, right, is an incredible fixation on who can beat Trump above everything else. Everybody always wants to win in politics, but there is something deeper, and there is a real palpable concern that a lot of different voters. By the way, a diverse range of voters told me, young and old, white people and people of color. Boy, if this guy wins again, our democracy is really in trouble. Can we withstand it? And people really scared, really feeling that. And it's not like we haven't been through things before. And I mentioned diversity because, you know, Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock had their joke about after November 16 saying, anyone who comes up to you and says this is the worst thing America's ever done is coming out of a certain life experience, which is a fair point.
Right.
But more broadly, I'm just hearing that from a lot of people. So that overrides everything. And yet at the same time, the party race, as we've seen right now, is incredibly open, incredibly undecided.
Yeah. Is from your point of view, looking at even what's happening with the Democrats, some would opine that things are in disarray and up in the air. Whether that be the case or not, that's what some look like. One of the front runners is not necessarily a front runner anymore. Just from your point of view, as Ari Melber, what do you think about how the Democratic race is shaping up? And is the Democratic race responsive enough to what you're hearing from those voters? Like, if we don't do something, this guy's going to get back in.
I think it's fascinating to see the race so wide open with candidates who would appear strong for a variety of reasons faltering or out already, and others doing well in these early contests, which, again, it's just a race for delegates. That's what this is. It's not a race for the best TV coverage or the best debate performance or anything else. You have to stack the delegates. And so what you see in the early field is just 3% of the delegates. Everyone should keep in mind in Iowa and New Hampshire, and you see a lead here by Buttigieg and Sanders, followed by Warren and Klobuchar, basically. But that could change very quickly in the next few states where more delegates will be allotted, and then Super Tuesday where a third will be allotted. So my job as a journalist is really to try to take that seriously, to show viewers every night, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, be fair and welcome all the candidates. I do think it's fascinating that the Democratic Party is so worried about Trump and its current choices that it's considering taking someone whose main elective experience is 12 years as a Republican mayor, and Mike Bloomberg, who has a lot of money, and voters will ultimately debate that out as well. But it's hard to think of any other race in the modern era, which I would date from like 72 when we started this type of system where voters are more involved in the primaries, because people forget, very recently, elites would still just pick the nominee. Right. It's only 72 cents that we've done it this way. And it's hard to think of any other area that's been this wide open.
Bloomberg, you've talked about him a bit on the show. You've been forthright in covering stop and frisk, which he probably would rather not be covered as much. But, I mean, it's becoming a big story. A lot of us in New York knew about it, obviously, but a lot of people outside the city. How damning is that, do you think, for someone to be running who was saying the things he was saying and promoting such a harsh and codified racial profiling policy?
I think it's a very significant policy that was very important to the lives of New Yorkers and central to how he governed. This isn't one of those things where somebody said something once or did something in college and we're still on it. This is his most recent governing experience. This is how he treated people when he had power. And the facts, which I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with, but others may not know all the details because, for one thing, it wasn't a national policy. So even if you follow national news, this was a explicit policy of racial profiling, which is controversial. Most people in government don't admit to doing that, even if they do it. He did, and the reasons for that are somewhat interesting, but it was because of the way that it was litigated. They basically had to defend the statistics, which showed 87% of the people stopped were black and brown. The majority of them were innocent. And so Bloomberg found himself on the record trying to explain that while it was litigated.
Right.
And so he would say things. He would say, quote, "We should actually stop whites even less," end quote, and other things that are now back out there. I think what's important in this process is that we vet these candidates. So it's not my job to tell anyone, do or don't vote for someone based on this or that. If you're a single issue or a multi-issue voter, you'll figure it out. It is my job to say, this is what he did when he had power, and this was racial profiling. And I had his campaign manager on just last week in an interview that got some attention because I said, do you know how many stops there were? And we went back and forth. I said, because it was 5 million stops over the course of the tenure. There was 1 year where there were more stops than there were black residents of New York, which means statistically, if you lived in New York, no matter how lawful you were and how great a job you had and how much you did everything right, you were likely to be stopped once or more by the color of your skin. I played him a video of a young New Yorker who was interviewed by the New York Times who explained he was stopped 60 times. So I don't know what it's like to walk around and live that experience as a human being. As a journalist, I know what it's like to gather those facts and present them. So I think that's a huge deal from Bloomberg. Again, when people hear enough negative, they say, oh, are you saying don't vote for Bloomberg?
Right.
No. I'm saying this is what to look at. And I could show you, we've done obviously pieces on other candidates as well. It's also this funny thing. He's newer to the race, sort of. So we're getting into him right now. I know that both Senators Klobuchar and Harris in their records as prosecutors was scrutinized. I've asked Senator Harris on the show about that. So it comes to everybody, but boy, is it a big issue. I'll tell you, since sometimes I get to ask you questions, interview. I for one am surprised by how many African American leaders in the Democratic Party, not necessarily like independent civil rights leaders, but in the party, aren't even doing a vetting. They're not saying prove it, and in a month maybe you. I'm seeing people jump in front of Bloomberg to say it's all okay. What do you? I'm surprised by that.
Well, and I was going to ask you, just as someone outside the black community looking in, what do you think? Because I've had several people who are non-black say, "Mark, we explain this," and honestly, a lot of these people again aren't from here. Okay, so they've kind of minimized. I think a lot of them did not even know as much about it, and they just jumped out there. And I'll be very honest with you, and I don't want this to sound too pejorative in terms of people and how they make decisions. Bloomberg's got a lot of money. If you are an African-American elected official who does not get a lot of money from the constituency, a lot of African-American elected officials serve communities that don't have a lot of money to give them or invest in their campaigns. Bloomberg comes in there and just takes care of all of that. And I'm wondering now, I'm just speculating people, he's saying, hey, look, support me, I'll support you. And he's writing checks and people aren't really digging down. And I think also there's a level of desperation. Trump is so bad and people thought it would be Biden, and Biden seems to be faltering. I think for a lot of people in the black community, they felt like getting Trump out needed to be a white-on-white crime. All right, you need a white dude, and that was unfortunate. It was Kamala's problem. I had a lot of respect for her. I think she was, kind of kneecapped unfairly and unfairly scrutinized. Remember, Kamala, too tough as a prosecutor, which really was not evidence of that. Hillary was the crime bill, but you notice how Biden's never been called to task on the crime bill. He voted for it. Bernie voted for it. Never been called to task. So Bloomberg is kind of the first male, and people might have thought that you can get away with it because they only put this on women, So it's kind of funny that way. But I think just in recent days and hours, people are like, wait a minute, did we jump into this too early? But there's and it's interesting. You're covering it. You're putting it all out there, and fairly. For those of you who don't know, Ari has covered all sides of these issues. He's had the other side on there. He's had the Sam Nunbergs and the other people, who've been Trump supporters. Honestly, Ari, MSNBC gets accused of being Fox on the left, which I think you and I agree is not true at all. You know, people try to say MSNBC is partisan. How, if Trump were to say what Bloomberg said, of course you'd have to cover it, right? So how can you not cover and report what Bloomberg is saying?
Well, absolutely, and I think that people are interested in a lot of these things because of the politics, so we don't ignore that. There's political energy, and everyone knows in a team sport, a lot of times you know, the other side fouls, maybe you don't think your side fouls as much, right? There's that dynamic, which is a real dynamic in the public energy, and our job is to both understand how that plays out, to tell you accurately why something might be a gaffe or not, but then also to do the substantive part.
Right.
You know, the horse race prediction garbage, it doesn't even work. It's amoral and it's not correct, by which I mean everyone telling you their prediction is Trump will lose doesn't tell you whether or not you know anything about how he'd govern. And they were wrong anyway. So it's doubly right. And the fact that sometimes they get it right is no different than the markets, right? You got, I mean, I find this fascinating. This relates to politics, but it's an analogy. You got all these people on Wall Street who make money managing other people's money. And statistically, they don't do better than if you just randomly put it into the market in the S&P 500. Likewise, you've got a lot of people who make their living telling us how it's going to be. So some people do that, and that exists in the media. We on the beat, what I'm trying to do is follow the evidence, present the information, also give you a view of politics, and not get into the prediction game. And so following the evidence means, let's vet Bloomberg and anyone else. And it's funny, as you say, I mean, I had Sam Nunberg this week because he used to work for Roger Stone. I think the beat might be the only show in the history of the world that's had Sam Nunberg and Yo Gotti on both. And so people know us for a range of things. And I get and it's my job to take the criticism, whether that's someone saying, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't want to hear that person. I get it. Because now take Sam, I'm not picking on him, but Sam Nunberg worked for Trump in the beginning of the primary campaign, was helping him get elected, then became a Mueller witness, was on my show this week defending Roger Stone at a time where everyone's going the other way. I think we learn more by hearing that perspective, even if you disagree with it. Okay. But I'm going to catch flack from some people who say, well, I'm eating dinner at 6 p.m. on the East Coast. I'm having a little pasta. I'm flipping a burger. I don't want Sam Nunberg in my living room while I eat dinner. And I say to you, I get it. And that's where your freedom of remote comes in, because the fact that you don't want him in your house is totally valid. Right. But what I'm doing, even if it corresponds with your dinner, respect, is still a news show. And so I've had that in all kinds of ways. And by the way, when we hold people accountable, I always find it interesting, and viewers can track. Some of them come back and some of them don't. So Corey Lewandowski hasn't been back since a, I would call tough but fair interview we did. But if he's ever willing, he is welcome back, because you know what? He managed Donald Trump's first campaign. So in this world where everyone's talking about Trump anyway and everyone's got their theories, you don't want to hear with facts. I fact-checked him, but you don't want to even hear what someone who's been in the game and in the room knows. I do, although I'm not going to let him get away with lies either.
Yeah. How do you feel when people accuse the network MSNBC of being partisan? How does that get under your skin? No,
my first rule of thumb is I focus on what I'm doing, what I'm involved in, and I can't speak for everything else, right? I will say, as a matter of where things are, there's a lot more skepticism and criticism of the press nowadays in public than there used to be. I think for two reasons. One, the internet has democratized a lot of this in ways that I think are both positive and corrosive. And two, we have political movements now that aren't just complaining about some press the way anyone would, but actually it's inherent to the grievance politics. You see that in supporters of Donald Trump. You see that in supporters of Bernie Sanders. And I'm not making a moral equivalence between the two, but for everything that I just said earlier in our conversation about what's wrong with Donald Trump, it is true that he was initially underestimated, and his supporters who felt that are right about that, if maybe you think nothing else. For Senator Sanders, it is true that he actually is running on a platform that involves not only criticizing, but trying to change the power structure of corporations, the establishment, if any media company
Right.
is a corporation, right, it's fair for his supporters to ask, well, how are you going to cover something when actually he wants to reduce your power or reduce the power of a lot of corporations, right? Those are all fair questions. So my view is to not get into the personal of whether it stings me or my producers or we have a hardworking team that puts on a show every night and try to really take it for what it is.
Yeah.
And I will tell you on the Trump stuff for him has worked, but at times, right, he has also abused it and been lying because he is not saying, here's a legitimate potential criticism of the press, and then let me go from there. No, he's trying to supplant the press with lies that are designed to literally trick his own people.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you about someone when they are conning their own ally? Forget everything else he's doing over there. He's also credibly been proven to try to con his own people.
I believe we're in a real disinformation era. How do you feel about disinformation and the impact it's having? Just picking up on that question of what Trump is doing. I mean, a lot of people every day are more and more victims of disinformation.
That's the challenge, and it's partly a challenge of the negative forces, Trump and some of his allies and others, and it's partly a challenge of media literacy. I mean, do you want to be someone who says, oh, I saw this, so I just shared it because I liked it, because I agreed with it? Or do you make a distinction between, well, if I got it from Mark or I got it from the New York Times or I got it from a reputable source, I will share that automatically because until Mark or the New York Times disproves me, I found them to be credible. But if it's just an unknown thing floating around that purports to quote something or say something or hurt someone, well, if it's just floating around, why would I share that before I know if it's true? Because then that's where you are a publisher as well, whether you're sending it to your trusted 10 friends. It could be a text thread, could be a social media, or you could be, and you might feel guilty about it, you could be the tweet that then gets retweeted by the president. And all of a sudden, you're the one that spread something you didn't know where it came from. So I think it has to be more than I like what this says. And that's media literacy, and I don't mean to sound all whatever, high-minded. It's just like we have to all figure out what we're doing with that.
And discern. Lastly, you're a hip-hop head.
True.
So people know that about you. They see it on the show. And I confess, I've been on your show a lot. I've been on a lot of different shows over the years. Everybody's different show. When you had me on with Master P.
I loved it.
But no, it was like, and people who've seen me were acting as if that was my first time on television, period. Like I found, man, you on with Master P. I mean, people came out, people were stopping in the street more than usual. You the guy that was with Master P.
Yeah?
I mean, stock just
I
kind of
didn't know
went
that,
up.
Mark.
I was like, wow, okay, thank you. It's like, did you? I said, well, I've been on Ari's show before. You have? Yeah, maybe I saw you, but that was Master P. So how did you become such a hip hop head and a hip hop aficionado?
I think when I was growing up, I went to Garfield High School, which is in the inner city of Seattle. It's where Quincy Jones and Jimi Hendrix went, and it was just all around. So I don't remember feeling like it was some sort of choice. It was just we were in school, and it was like Busta Rhymes. People were walking in the halls saying "Ya Ya Ya," Wu-Tang, the Fugees. The Score had blown up like my freshman year, and so it was just around. And I love all music. Is what's funny. I recognize obviously the hip hop thing has taken on a little bit of a life of its own. But, on the show this week, we have from Blondie, Debbie Harry on.
Right.
We've had REM on. We do a lot with hip-hop, and we quote hip-hop because it applies so much. But I love all music. The hip-hop just came out of that environment in my school, I think, and then I just stayed with it.
So you never did you ever perform music? Did you ever learn
No,
music?
I don't know how to play much, nothing like that.
You know how to rap, though, right?
I don't know how to rap. I like reading rap and
quote a
listening to
lot.
rap. I quote a lot, but I mean,
You could probably. Have you ever tried?
not really. This is what I would say. I come to it as a fan, and I think that's actually easier.
Okay.
It's not like I'm trying to be it, but I'm a huge fan of it, and it comes from that place.
Would you ever want to try it?
I don't think so. I mean, I'll tell you. So the two questions I get the most, right, are what you're talking about. Wait, do you want to be a musician, or do you want to run for office? And I did work, for two senators and have that background. And so I understand the question because it's hanging out, right? But it's like when you're sitting next to Master P, do you want to start a music and a snack empire? Because you tried the rap snacks,
Right.
Or do you feel like, no, this is cool, we're all here, but I'm good with what I'm doing? That's how I feel right now.
That's how you feel about it. Okay. Ari Melber, the host of The Beat with Ari Melber, weeknights on MSNBC. Thank you, sir.
Thank
you
you
for having me on so much. We'll have to do this again.
100%.
All right. Take care. Thank you for listening to Make It Plain and Get Woke. Remember to listen, like, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe to Make It Plain and Get Woke daily. Check out makeitplain.com to subscribe. If all minds are clear, it has been made plain.